This question comes from Mark Jordan in Charleston, South Carolina. He writes, in a period of high inflation, which particular businesses owned by Berkshire Hathaway will perform the best, and which will perform the worst, and why?
Well, the businesses that will perform the best are the ones that require little capital investment to facilitate inflationary growth and that have strong positions that allow them to increase prices with inflation. And we have a candy business, for example, and the value of the dollar since we bought that candy business has probably fallen at least 85%, I would say, 80 to 85%. And that candy business sells 75% more pounds of candy than it did when we bought it, but it has 10 times the revenues, and it doesn't take a lot more capital. So that kind of a business, any business that has enough freedom to price to offset inflation and doesn't require commensurate investment or huge investment to support it, will do well. Businesses like our utilities, which get, in effect, a bond-like return, but require, if you're going to build a generating plant, it costs twice as much per kilowatt hour of capacity, and all you're going to get is a fixed return, and yields on bonds go up, perhaps dramatically if you get high inflation, is not going to do that well in an inflationary period, just because it has certain aspects of a bond-like investment, and bonds generally are not going to do well in inflation. Charlie?
Well, but like our insurance operations, our capital-intensive railroad business is certainly one of the best railroads in the world, and our utility operations are certainly one of the best utility operations in the world. And so it isn't all bad to be up there world class in your main businesses.
Our railroad, the government's talked about building a high-speed rail system in California. I think they're talking about 800 miles of track, and their estimated cost was about $43 billion, and estimated costs on constructions of things like that go up dramatically, much more often than they get reduced even by a minor amount. And of course we paid $43 billion, counting debt assumed, for a rail system which has 22,000 miles of main track and 6,000 plus locomotives and 13,000 bridges if you ever want to buy a bridge. So that the replacement value of that asset during inflationary already is huge, and it would grow dramatically, and the world, our country, will always need rail transportation. So it is a terrific asset to own. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, the best businesses during inflation are usually the best. They're the businesses that you buy once, and then you don't have to keep making capital investments subsequently. So you do not face the problem of continuous reinvestment involving greater and greater dollars because of inflation. That's one reason real estate in general is good during inflation. If you built your own house 55 years ago like Charlie did, or bought one 55 years ago like I did, it's a one-time outlay. Whereas if you get an inflationary expansion in replacement capital without having to replace yourself. And if you got something that's useful to someone else, it tends to be priced in terms of replacement value over time. So you really get the inflationary kick. Now, if you're in a business such as the utility business or the railroad business, it just keeps eating up more and more money, and your depreciation charges are inadequate, and you're kidding yourself as to your real economic profits. So any business with heavy capital investment tends to be a poor business to be in inflation, and often it's a poor business to be in generally. And the business where you buy something once, a brand is a wonderful thing to own during inflation. See's Candy built their brand many years ago. Now we've had to nourish it as we've gone along, but the value of that brand increases during inflation, just as the value of really any strongly branded goods. Gillette bought the entire radio rights to the World Series in 1939. And as I remember, it cost them $100,000, and for that they got to broadcast the Yankees, I think, versus the Reds in 1939. And think of the number of impressions they made on minds in 1939 dollars for $100,000. And they were getting into the minds of young guys like myself. I was 8 or 9, and millions of people. And they did it in those dollars then. And of course, if you were going to go out and try and have a similar impressions on millions of minds now, it costs a fortune. And part of that's due to inflation, part of it's due to other things. But it was a great investment which could be made in 1939 dollars that paid off in terms of selling razors and blades in 1960 and 1970 and 1980 dollars. So that's the kind of business you want to own. Charlie?
Well, yeah, but if the inflation ever goes completely out of control, you have no idea how it's going to end up. If it weren't for the Weimar inflation, we might never have had Adolf Hitler. It was the twosome of the Great German inflation followed by the Great Depression that brought us Hitler. And think of the price that the world paid for that one. We don't want inflation because it's good for See's Candy.
No, I didn't quite realize I was proposing that.
I wasn't criticizing you.
What's good for See's Candy is good for the United States.
But given the fact that we're dealing with fairly high levels of inflation in India, what would your advice be to people who are investing? What should they change? What should they do?
Yeah, well, inflation, Keynes said it many years ago that it's an invisible tax that only one man in a million really understands, and it's a tax on people that have had faith in their currency that the government's issued. The best protection, the best investment against inflation is to improve your own earning power, your own talents. Very few people maximize their talents, and if you increase your talents, they can't tax it while you're doing it. They can't take it away from you. So if you become more useful in your activities, your profession, doctor, lawyer, whatever it may be, that is the best protection against a currency that might decline at a rapid rate. And the best investment, passive investment, I think is a good business. If you own an interest in a good business, you're very likely to maintain purchasing power no matter what happens to the currency. But it's interesting. In the United States, the value of the dollar since I was born has declined by 94% to 6 cents. So inflation is a very cruel tax on people who believe in fixed dollars, but things can work out pretty well even during inflationary times. I mean, if somebody told me when I was born, that the dollar bill is going to go to 6 cents, I might have said, let me go back. I'm not interested in emerging into that kind of a world. But actually, it's worked out pretty well, so I have no complaints.